Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is the Ukraine War news update for the 28th of June 2023. Let's get straight to our opening gambit. The Ukraine general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply. I find these indicatively useful, and my goodness, we can see a trend that seems to be emerging with an uptick in liquidated personnel for the Russians. That's almost 1,000 lost yesterday, 930. I don't know if that reflects strikes behind the lines with things like storm shadows. Those are active consistently every single night and sometimes in the day as well. So that is a really large number there of lost troops. 13 APVs, no tanks at all. So down there, 13 APVs is still a useful number. And then we have the lowest number I can remember for what is possibly months now. 6 artillery systems and 1 multiple launch rocket system. I don't know whether they're just running out of things to hit, but that is pretty significant. I don't know. Well, I don't know what it tells us. We'll have to see if the numbers are similar tomorrow. The Ukrainians have been taking out just extraordinary numbers of artillery pieces, up to in the 40s on some days, but consistently over the kind of mid to late teens. So usually somewhere between 20 and 40 at the moment, which is just a phenomenal number to be losing every single day. So at some point that had to change, and I guess that's now. It'd be interesting, as I say, to see whether that downtick continues as a trend going forward. One anti-aircraft warfare system, don't know what type. That might be a book. I did see some imagery of a book being taken out. 7 drones, and then as we come down, we have 2 vehicles and fuel tanks, and no pieces of special equipment. So really quiet day in many categories there. Just the troops having an uptick. So maybe it's just a difficult day on the front line, or Russia had some troop accumulation struck behind the lines, and we'll get onto some of those. So there were 6 drones sent into Shahid drones sent into Ukraine overnight that were taken down. I don't know how many were sent in total, but there you go. So not a massive saturation attack or anything like that. If we look at Oryx figures to try and get a handle on this, now I know that on a daily basis, it's very difficult to take these, sometimes every 2 days actually. It's very difficult to take these and say that's what's happened over the last 2 days, and that they aren't necessarily indicative of a trend as a whole. But I've seen the last sort of 3 or 4 of these, and there does seem to be a trend where the Russians are losing more visually confirmed equipment than the Ukrainians, and that is something that's continued here today. But take all the usual caveats. This can apply. Some of these figures might be equipment that was lost at the beginning of the war, at any time between the beginning and now. As you can see, a number of sort of BMPs, infantry fighting vehicles, and whatnot. A few tanks as well. 7 tanks. No, 9 tanks there. So quite heavy losses for those big pieces of equipment. Then, as you can see, lots of howitzers, as you'd expect. We have Estrella there, which is a surface-to-air missile system, and then we have a lot of trucks being taken out. So there's 20 Ural and Kamaz trucks, and then you've got all these others as well. So yeah, heavy losses for the Russians in those categories, and the total there was 70, and the total for the Ukrainians is 29. And I think that does tell you that yes, the Ukrainians are losing some equipment in their attacks. Of course, they are on the offensive. You would expect nothing less. It's not magic, but the Russians are losing considerably more. When we look at other things they've lost, it's not just the Ukrainians that have been exacting a cost on the Russian forces. The Russian Air Force has lost somewhere between 5 and 8 airframes when Wagner went on their jaunt up to Moscow. Here we see the IL-22 crew members shot down by Wagner. Why I've brought this up is that they lost 10 people in that plane being taken out, and they aren't just your general squaddies or whatever, or the equivalent for the Air Force. Lieutenant Colonel, 2 majors, 3 captains, a lieutenant. Just that was a massive loss of expertise, knowledge, training, so on and so forth. And that confirms that. Yeah, pretty bad for the Russians there. And they seem to have lost a Ka-52 helicopter near Primorsk. Now, why this is causes me to raise an eyebrow is that Primorsk is on the southern coast, not too far from Berdyansk, between Berdyansk and Henichesk, I think. Now, if that's the case, how are the Ukrainians shooting down a helicopter in that area? Something funky is going on there for that to have happened, unless that was taken out, on the ground. But I don't know. I don't know. It's shot down usually means shot down, but this could just be Tim White reporting that as that. Who knows? But if that has been shot down near Primorsk, then that is a real challenge for the Ukrainians, because it means that the air defense systems can reach pretty much everywhere behind occupied lines. Well, certainly as far as Crimea, but I don't know if that's the case. Take that with a good healthy dose of skepticism. Right, we're going to look at sort of missile hits now. Overnight, Kedivka, Alchevsk, so that's up sort of in the Donbass, halfway up the Donbass, behind the occupied territories. You've got Alchevsk that is often hit. Loud explosions that were reported by locals. Kedivka is known for hosting Kadyrovites, which were bombed multiple times, taking heavy casualties. So Kedivka is a place that has been hit. I don't know if you remember. I think it was there that there was a warehouse of a load of equipment, and in fact, a Kadyrovite was doing a video of all the stuff that was taken out in one blow, and that was a considerable amount of equipment. So the Kadyrovites are in that area. Explosions reported in Primorsk, so this makes me wonder whether that helicopter was taken out on the ground. If there are explosions there rather than in the air, and that will make more sense of that helicopter being taken down so far behind our lines, and that could be a Storm Shadow working there. And yeah, sorry, Primorsk, 3 Storm Shadows hitting. So just to let you know, there's Mariupol, Melitopol, Primorsk is there, and yes, actually it's quite near Berdyansk then. And Tim White saying ambulances and Kamaz trucks to pick up the dead are reportedly moving to the northern suburbs of Melitopol, where the explosions in the occupied city have happened. You can hear the distant rumble of the arrivals in a video from a local pro-Ukrainian channel. I won't bother playing you that. You get the idea. So that is significant. So we've actually had Melitopol being hit, we've had Mykolaiivka being hit, and Tokmak, that, as well as Primorsk as well. As well. You get the idea that the Ukrainians have been very busy hammering targets behind the Russian lines. Russian forces, on the other hand, and this is the biggest news, and it has provoked some pretty intense rhetoric back at Russia internationally as well. I think the US brought out a statement today, John Kirby, but Russian forces deliberately targeted Ukrainian non-combatants again today. One of thousands of attacks, and many that happen every day. That's why negotiation is not on the table, says War Monitor. What happened? Well, Kramatorsk was hit. Kramatorsk, which is in that kind of semicircle of settlements and cities behind Bakhmut, quite a bit behind, but it is often hit because it's kind of a staging point for that region. However, they have hit a completely civilian target here. And the question is always, when this happens, was that the intention? If it's not the intention, what they're using, a missile that's particularly inaccurate. There are claims that this is a really inaccurate missile used. Why are you sending an inaccurate missile in to try and hit a target in the middle of a city? Like, what are you doing, Russia? So either way, this is not good. And it's a pizza restaurant that was hit. Loads of casualties. The casualty number is going up. There was a 17-year-old girl killed. 2 14-year-old sisters were killed. I mean, these are children being taken out. The footage is pretty horrible. I've seen some horrible footage of this. It says 3 people killed. Actually, it's way more now as they're going through the rubble. In Kramatorsk is not good. Death toll is now 8, with 56 people injured, and some of those are seriously injured. There's a really the Colombian writer has given an account of his experience of being in a restaurant, and the woman who was, I think, an aid worker, was basically, I don't know if she's in a coma, but she's between life and death at the moment. He gives a really kind of harrowing account of how that, all just evocative account of how that took place. It's just, yeah, it's one of those instances where, for your Russian voices in the threads below and elsewhere, anyone that's pro-Russian that like, is this what you advocate? Every time something like this happens, go to your nearest person that's giving you the pro-Russian point of view and say, is this what you are defending? Like, really openly, are you defending this? Because if you're defending this, you're wrong. You are morally wrong. Like, and it just makes me very, very angry that people can sit there and defend an invading army doing this to a nation, a sovereign nation. Is just absolutely unacceptable. And speaking of Russian voices and trolls on my threads, this I almost did as just a separate 2-minute video last night. It's really fascinating. Yesterday, I don't think there was a single troll on my threads. And you're wondering, Prigozhin, all that going wrong with him, some of the Wagners being arrested around the place, his PMC technically being illegal, but kind of not. He has a troll farm that operates, one of the major troll farms, and you're wondering, did they not turn up for work yesterday? I mean, literally, are they not getting paid? Did they not turn up? If there were no trolls on my threads yesterday that I could see, correct me if I'm wrong, then what was going on? Was it National Troll Day off? Or National Troll Holiday? I don't know, but it's really interesting that none of them were on the threads. Anyway, Phillips O'Brien is giving, well, he's not talking about this, but this is the news is this is a big old American aid package. Lots of stuff here that they've given. We're moving obviously onto the military aid and whatnot. Additional munitions for Patriot, Stinger. Those are the MANPADS, man-held anti-aircraft systems, air defense systems. Additional ammunition for HIMARS, demolition munitions for obstacle clearing, so it's mine clearing equipment as well as munitions. 155, 105 mil artillery rounds, 30 Bradleys, 25 Strikers. So they are losing quite a few Bradleys. It seems to be their main vehicle for doing these probing attacks. They have lost a number of them. They are getting replaced. There was 15 other Bradleys given as well just recently. So that's 45 in the last sort of week or so. 25 Strikers, depends what they're coming armed with. TOW missiles, Javelin missiles, 84 anti-armor systems, anti-armor rockets, high-speed harms rockets, so they will take out radiation, so things like radars and whatnot from the air. Precision aerial munitions, probably things like Excalibur, unless that is something like, I don't know, aerial munition. Is that something fired from a plane? Small arms and over 22 million rounds of small arms ammunition and grenades, thermal imagery systems and night vision devices, always super useful. Testing diagnostic equipment to support vehicle maintenance and repair, spare parts, generators and other field equipment. Massive. That's a $500 million package. Really, really good from the US there. And lawmakers there are asking for cluster munitions for Ukraine. A bipartisan group of US lawmakers is calling on President Biden to provide Ukraine with cluster munitions, DPICM. That would be significant. The US has a whole stockpile of those that are ready to go to Ukraine if they got the go-ahead. And I really think this would be super useful, particularly for clearing out trenches. Okay, Lithuania to transfer 2 NASAMS. These are the national or Norwegian air defense systems. They are good. And 2 of them to go, 2 launches to go to Ukraine would be phenomenal. Lithuania has acquired 2 launches for the NASAMS air defense system and will soon transfer them to Ukraine. So I don't know whether that's them buying them from somewhere else or giving their own. The Czech Republic has promised more military equipment for Ukraine, says the defense minister. Unsure of what that is, but good news. The Netherlands seem to be coming up with loads of stuff, even though they're not giving from their own stocks. They don't have huge stocks, but they are acquiring things or paying for stuff, a bit like the UK. But they are doing a really good job, it seems. The Netherlands signed a €111 million contract with a Belgian firm, FN Herstal, for 7.62mm FN MAG machine guns for the Ukrainian army. the Ministry of Defense of the Netherlands does not say the exact number in terms of delivery. Ukrainian military already uses the American Mod 2 M240. Now, Belgium has quite a big arms manufacturing industry. This is why it's been quite surprising that Belgium hasn't come up with a good an awful lot in supporting Ukraine, and they've taken a bit of stick for that. But it's good to hear that the Netherlands are, picking up where the Belgians have left off or hadn't even started, I guess. So well done to the Dutch there. Rheinmetall will deliver 14 Leopard 2A4 tanks to Ukraine during 2024. That's next year on behalf of the government of the Netherlands. Again, the Dutch. I don't know if this is a further 14 that we knew nothing about or whether we've been told about this before. It gets quite confusing sometimes, but yeah, 14 2A4 MBTs, main battle tanks, on behalf of the Dutch government. They'll be doing them up and sending them over. The first of the 14 main battle tanks is to be delivered to Ukraine in January 2024, with the remaining vehicles to follow in the course of 2024. So there's obviously more than 14 then. Rheinmetall announced that the order is in the low three-digit million euro range. A corresponding agreement has also been reached with the federal government. The Netherlands and Denmark have already announced in April that they wanted to purchase the tanks together. I'm not quite sure. They mentioned 14, but more than 14. As well, Hensoldt. Now, I reported this the other day, and I don't know if this is the same reporting of this or whether it's for more. Hensoldt will deliver 4 more TRML 4D radars of DL defense to the armed forces of Ukraine. The radars are designed for Ukrainian IRIS-T, short range missile air defense systems. So that'd be super useful. Those radars are high value systems, and they are super useful for creating that network coverage across Ukraine. You don't want holes over these skies, so that there are places. I mean, this is why Russia keeps sending these waves of different munitions to try and find where there isn't coverage. And obviously, the more of this stuff you get, the more coverage you get, the better your air defense becomes. Arms from the Adriatic, Croatia's military support for Ukraine. Now, we knew these had been pledged, but now they've all been delivered. So just an update on that. 14 different Mi-8 helicopters. And so I've seen some of the footage of some of these being used already. So they've been on the front line for some time, but now they've all been delivered, which is fantastic, and that's super useful. Something like that, Ukrainians know how to use. They use them a lot. Brilliant. And here we are seeing some footage of a riverine boat, some kind of boat on the way to some RAB on the way to Kherson here. You can imagine what that would be used for, as they are trying to get or expand their bridgehead across the river on the left bank of Dnipro. And for the Russians, Putin is to provide the Rosgvardia. So one of the criticisms of the recent Prigozhin Wagner mutiny was the idea that actually there weren't many forces behind the lines, and the forces they didn't have any heavy equipment. So if Wagner had got to Moscow, would the Russians have been in a little bit of trouble, because they weren't kind of ready for any internal strife. So Ilya Ponomarenko says Putin is to provide the Rosgvardia with tanks and artillery. You might think, oh, that's up kitting the Russian forces. Yeah, but at what expense? At the expense of their regular military fighting in Ukraine, as well as the hardware in store. Don't even try to understand this hell of a decision. We all give it nothing but 100% support. So yeah, by all accounts, give your Rosgvardia, your kind of riot police inside Russia, all the tanks you want and artillery you want, because they are tanks and artillery pieces you won't be sending to the front line. So it is a kind of zero-sum game, isn't it? You take giving to one area of your armed forces is to take from somewhere else. Okay, let's look at other bits and pieces. A former Ukroboronprom official charged with state funds embezzlement. The Khmelnytsky police charged the ex-director of the enterprise within Ukraine's defense concern, Ukroboronprom, with embezzling almost 500,000 hryvnias, $13,500 of budget funds. So this is another example of Ukraine trying hard to clear up the corruption that is taking place within their systems. So whenever I see news like this, on the one hand you think, oh no, that's bad, but on the other hand you think, well, they're doing something about it. So silver lining and all that. Lukashenko said that Prigozhin gave up. Now, is this actually in the right place? I might move that. No, this is a good place. Lukashenko said that Prigozhin gave up on his demands concerning the dismissal of Russian Defense Minister Shoigu and Chief of the General Staff Gerasimov by Putin. So, this kind of rumbles on. Prigozhin appears not to be in the kind of power position if he's giving up on his major demands. He appears to be realizing that he is up against it and that Putin has the upper hand in the outcome of that. Some sources claim, and one thing I was saying is that, well, he's still kind of got his Wagner PMC. They might well be setting up shop in Belarus. There's still, he's still, the utility that he provides to Putin and the Kremlin appears to be still intact to some degree, otherwise he wouldn't exist, right? And nor would Wagner. So is it the case that they are still useful in Syria, in Africa, so on and so forth, and doing a job for the Russians? Well, there are lots of rumors, and these are somewhat unconfirmed, but some sources claim that Russian armed forces have taken control of the Wagner PMC in Syria. The commander and the officers have been arrested. If true, this is a huge development, and there's a number of sources reporting this. Saudi news agencies have been reporting this. Russian military police detained Wagner PMC commanders in different parts of Syria, Al-Hadath Syrian and Al-Arabiya. At least 4 detentions took place in Al-Sawadiyah in southern Syria, as well as at the Khmeimim air base, and raids on Wagner bases in Deir ez-Zor, Hama, and Damascus. Thank you for that challenge of language. Ukraine, so that is really significant, by the way. I can't tell you how significant that is, because it looks like that division between the Russian MOD and Wagner is alive and kicking, and there has been no resolution as of yet. In fact, the chasm between the two seems to be getting wider. Right, Ukrainian hackers have broke into the Russian Railways online conference. The Russians discussed the transportation of goods in the occupied territories. However, every word was watched by Ukrainian hackers. All the information and participants of the conference were recorded. And at the end, they said hello. Now, I don't know the wisdom of that. Just keep quiet, record it, and then they won't change their security settings. But now you're thinking, oh, they know that. But anyway, they said hello at the end. Now the SSU is processing the received data. So that's a bit of a kick in the teeth for the Russians. Repatriation. US Treasury sanctioned SC South LLC-owned Russia flag vessel Sparta 4, itself sanctioned for being linked to SC South, transited the Bosphorus toward the Black Sea en route from Tartus, Syria to Novorossiysk military harbour, carrying military cargo. Civilian vessel it ain't. This is, if this is true, that's a real challenge for the Ukrainians. That's Turkey allowing a vessel through the Bosphorus Straits that clearly should not be allowed through the Bosphorus Straits. That should be checked and sorted. I don't know. I mean, the Montreux Convention that stops naval vessels going through, I don't know what it says about the fine print of a civilian vessel being used for naval, military means. And is this a loophole? Is this a genuine loophole? I mean, surely it should be about, the functionality of the rules, right? They function to stop an army or a navy being able to improve its war stance. Well, if that's the case, then a vessel like that should be stopped as well. That is my opinion, and of course it's correct. Shashank Joshi, the defense correspondent for The Economist, says US seems to be trying to stir the pot with these leaks. So the US have leaked that General Surovikin, who was in charge, remember, then got sidelined, got moved sideways. You got Gerasimov back in charge. So he was the one who started building these big defensive lines, the Surovikin lines. He had advanced knowledge of Yevgeny Prigozhin's plans to rebel against Russia's military leadership, according to US officials briefed on American intelligence on the matter. Now, what was important about him was during the advance to Moscow. He came out in support publicly. He's one of the very few people who did come out publicly to support Putin. It wasn't like uber strong support, but he did implore Wagner to stop doing what they were doing. Did he know about that in advance? What does that say about his relationship with Prigozhin and his relationship with Putin and the rest of the MOD? I don't know, but it's interesting that the US is leaking this stuff, and B, getting a hold of this information. They had information on the Prigozhin, uh, jaunt long before the Russians themselves did. So that is significant. I was just trying to look at Putin's face there. That's why I was looking at that. Anyway, as you do. Um, so what is this? Oh yeah, Russian president's recognition that Wagner PMC. Now I should have put this earlier, but this is a really big bit of news, right? So the president has recognized that Wagner PMC was fully financed by the state. Putin has come out and said, what's he said? He's admitted that the Kremlin gave Wagner nearly $1 billion in the past year. Why is this significant? Well, one of the reasons it's significant because it then shows that all of the stuff that Wagner does around the world, all the nefarious stuff, is done in the name of the Kremlin. And you can go back to 2014 and look at PMC activity and think, wow, is this a case of sorry, that's my mate there. Is this a case of the Russian state admitting, I mean, they've already kind of done this anyway, that they were fully behind the activities in 2014 onwards? I would say yes. This is really, really significant in my opinion. Politico goes into some more detail here, but I think, from May to 2022 to 2023, this Russian state paid more than 86 billion rubles, so that's almost $1 billion, to the Wagner Group, Putin said. Just quite incredible. The Wagner paramilitary group, created in 2014 by the oligarch turned warlord turned mutineer Yevgeny Prigozhin, has been involved in some of the fiercest fighting of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and is active in various locations in Africa and the Middle East. So that is the Kremlin doing all of those things, right? So wherever Wagner is, you can just supplant Wagner with the Russian MOD. So when Wagner are attacking the Russian MOD, it's the Russian MOD attacking the Russian MOD in some sense. Right, let's go on and quickly look at Frontline. Normally I would have done this earlier. Sorry about that. Okay, Thomas Tyner, just in general, says this. As Russia's army will be routed in the coming days, you will see lots of experts who non-stop preach that the Russian defensive lines will be difficult for Ukrainians to breach. I'm not an expert, but I have been saying that. I mean, they are difficult to breach, like empirically so. But that's not to say that once they are breached, you won't get a capitulation of Russian forces, which I've also said. So I'm somewhere in the middle. It is difficult. The Ukrainians are finding it hard to breach those lines, but once they are breached, there will be trouble for the Russians for sure. He's saying those people would do rapid U-turns and declare that they always knew that Ukrainians could do it. Oh, the Ukrainians can do it. It's just it will be difficult and kind of at what cost. Now, I was looking at New World Economics (NWE) war reports last night, and their video was something like Ukrainian, and they purport to be objective and neutral, but they're like Ukrainians counteroffensive hits a brick wall. And you're thinking they've taken more land since the beginning of their counteroffensive in this month than Russia did in like 7 months or something. I don't understand. So, well, I do understand. These commentators are pro-Ukrainian. I watched the video and all the language you use. Would you have said that when the Russians saying they've only made marginal gains and it's insignificant and playing down everything that Ukrainians have done? And then when you look at what the Russians were doing, inching forwards in Bakhmut, were you saying that was marginal and insignificant then? No. So that tells you all you need to know about where they are. So I think be careful about who you watch. And I have my biases, as you know, and I'm pro-Ukrainian from a moral point of view. Just see the kind of bombings from earlier. But I'm not going to try and pretend their counteroffensive is something it isn't. But I'm also not going to downplay it. Hopefully I'm being realistic. It's bloody difficult. They're going to lose loads of kit. They're going to lose loads of soldiers in order that they try and find a weak point to break through. But once they break through, they've used 3 brigades so far out of 35. Like, if you think that's hitting a brick wall, they haven't really started yet. This is still the early phases. I think people need to recognize that. Now, it might be slower than they're expecting. They might have underestimated the minefields and the defenses. Yes, quite possibly. But that's not like, well, let's give up and go home. It's just like, yeah, we've got challenges, but pretty sure we can overcome them. That's my position anyway. Uh, Kiev Independent says military reports advance of up to 1,400 meters in different sectors. Difficult when they say that. I mean, that could be anywhere. That could be 1,400 meters in one place and like 10 meters in all the others. So, you don't quite know what's going on. But there are advances in Bakhmut, to the south of Bakhmut, around the canal. They've reached a dam in the Kurdimivka area, which means that they're basically very close to taking on Kurdimivka as a settlement. Ukrainians cleared more area along the eastern side of the Donbass Canal. The 80th, so they're moving down the canal from the north to impact on the area around Klishchivka. 80th Air Assault Brigade progressed 1 kilometer into a forest strip, so it could be one of these forests to the northeast of northwest of Klishchivka. And no further details about the exact direction. The Ukrainians are on the outskirts of Kurdimivka, and claim by Osman, who's fighting in that area, says that they progressed 1 kilometer into a forest strip near Bakhmut. So that's one of the sources for that. So on and so forth. There's quite a bit of footage. There's footage of putting a flag on top of the dam by Kurdimivka, so that's been geolocated. And then we go down to Kherson. I don't know if is it worth. Yeah, so that's another map of that area by Kurdimivka, really putting pressure on that, which is just the other side of the canal there. That's the Antonivsky Bridge. We're going to come to that next. Let's go back to null reports. Before we get to the Antonivsky Bridge, I was just trying to look to see if there is. Yes, here, that's what I wanted. So, in the Velika Novosilka axis, heavy fighting is reported west of Stara Mayorska, and that's a black outlined area. Breakthrough, the Ukrainians are trying to force a breakthrough from Levadny towards and Rivnopil towards Pryutny, and they've made progress in the fields east of Uruzhainy. So you've got fighting around these two areas still, these two settlements, Staromoilska and Uruzhainy, but they are making gains apparently, and then moving in on Pryutny and Stepova as well from the Rivnopil and the Vadny directions. So that is what's going on in that sector. Don't know anything about Piatichatki, but there's an awful lot of talk about Leshki and Kherson. So here, no report says the Ukrainians managed to maintain their bridgehead and reportedly expand the amount of personnel. I reported that yesterday to 120 in the area, probably more now. Russians complaining about the lack of aviation artillery support and presence of Ukrainian anti-air defense systems nearby and electronic warfare systems and jammers. So they are reporting, I think it's Rebar reporting that the Ukrainians are using S-300s in the area, as well as jamming things really successfully, hence why the Russians were calling for air aviation support through the use of Telegram. Footage of MLRS shelling of the other side, so multiple launch rocket systems trying to hit the Ukrainians on the other side before they cross to get to the Oleshki area. Rebar says about the area. Russian aviation tried to strike the Ukrainian units near the dachas, but to no avail. The Ukrainians deployed S-300s, air defense systems, which complicate the Russians' work. First-person view and Lancet drones are losing signals due to electronic warfare units and jamming, and pontoon crossings are said to be noticed. That's not that they've fixed up pontoons, but they've got the pieces of the pontoon and whatnot on the other side ready to be pieced together. So more confirmation from the Russian side that the Ukrainians have increased their presence on the bridgehead and the massive artillery cover. So again, giving other evidence there. So we go through a few more of the I've shared that few more of the reports here. Ukrainian sources report that the Ukrainians are advancing on the city of Oleshki, and there are active battles. Russian troops were knocked out from one strong point. Russian sources report the advances under artillery and mortar fire and is faltering. So the Russian forces saying that they're hemming the Ukrainians in the fog of war, but the fighting seems to have intensified as the Ukrainian reinforcements are brought into the foothold. It's still a reconnaissance in force, which at some point could change into a bridgehead. Either way, it seems to have reached a level of risk for the Russians in which it will serve its intended purposes. Now, you don't know whether this is going to be a genuine place that they attack from to the east to kind of like have a pincer movement, or whether this is just to keep the Russians busy in that area and fix them there. Either option is eminently plausible, and then more sources to report on that sector. Right, let's go to finish with our geopolitical section. So the US Treasury is sanctioning companies linked to Wagner Group's mining operations. This makes Wagner's activities even more difficult. They're getting hit by the Russians themselves and then hit by sanctions. And the companies that work with Wagner are getting hit by sanctions. The US Treasury imposed sanctions against 4 companies and 1 individual connected to Prigozhin's Wagner Group. The targeted entities engaged in illicit gold mining and trading in Africa to fund the mercenary company, according to the Treasury Department's June the 27th release. Right. Now, should be, depending, I've got electricians around today, but I've got an extra that I'm going to be partly talking about Hungary, because I asked for viewers who are Hungarian to give me their opinion on what's going on in Hungary, and it's a few different views to discuss in that video. Anyway, here's someone going to town, not just someone, this is indeed Mikhailo Podolyak, the advisor to the head of the office of President of Ukraine, Zelensky. So Zelensky's head advisor, absolutely going for Viktor Orban, the leader of Hungary. Why? We'll come to that in a second. It's time for Viktor Orban to realize that Ukraine, which has been fiercely defending its freedom, its children, and their future for 489 days, effectively opposing the post-Soviet neo-empire with the traits of a historical serial killer, is absolutely rhetorically brilliant, which yesterday fiercely frightened half the world with its lawlessness, has absolute agency and sovereignty in its policy and decisions. That is, Ukraine has absolute agency and sovereignty. The question is, does Orban himself have agency? If he so openly humiliates European values, strictly adhering to Russian propaganda myths, and how much must he disrespect Hungary to so cynically trample the reputation of his own country into historical dirt? Ouch, that is huge. So why did he say that? In an exclusive interview with the German newspaper Bild, PM Viktor Orban said that he believes Ukraine cannot win the war, that it is not a sovereign nation, and that Putin is not a war criminal. What Viktor Orban meant by not a sovereign nation, he means that it's getting so much aid and assistance by NATO and the West that it's kind of just in their pocket type thing. It's not sovereign in that way, which is, going to really rile the Ukrainians, of course. So Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban said that the Ukraine is no longer a sovereign state. It has become dependent on Western support, in particular the will of the United States. He said it in an interview with Bild. Orban also noted that, quote, it is solely a matter for the Ukrainian people. So it's not sovereign, and then saying it is sovereign. It's solely a matter for the Ukrainian people. So I would advise them to do exactly what is best for them, but they had to determine what is best for them. Nobody else can determine that because they are an independent, proud nation and country. Yeah, but you just said they're not. Anyway, Viktor Orban, not very popular because he's basically saying Ukraine can't win the war. And yeah, goodness me, Orban. Right, this is also, there's some pretty interesting China nuggets in today's news. Don't see why not, says the Chinese ambassador to the EU, Fu Kong, when asked about support for Ukraine's goal to reach the 1991 borders. So, can they have Crimea back and the Donbass back? Don't see why not, says the Chinese foreign ambassador to the EU. Yeah, don't see why not. Oof, that's a gut punch to Russia. I mean, that is, Russia saying these are ours, particularly Crimea. This is ours. We want this to be ours. Yeah, not so much, says China, their number one ally. Oh dear, that's not good for Russia going forward. And not only that, a number of Chinese companies stopped and still have not resumed their deliveries to the Russian Federation after Prigozhin's mutiny. So they're not sure about the stability of the country. This is in Reuters that says Wagner mutiny exposes risks for China's deep Russian ties. As news broke on Saturday that mercenary Wagner Group troops were careering towards Moscow in a short lived rebellion, several businessmen from southern China began frantically calling factories to halt shipments of goods destined for Russia. We thought there was going to be a big problem, Shen Muhi, the head of the trade body for the firms in China's southern Fujian province, said, recalling the scramble among its members exporting auto parts, machinery, and garments to Russia. Though the crisis has eased, quote, some people remain on the sidelines as they're not sure what will happen later, he added, declining to name the companies pausing shipments. But a top US official on Monday said the weekend uprising had unsettled Beijing's cloistered leadership, and some analysts inside and outside China have started to question whether Beijing needs to ease off its political and economic ties to Moscow. It goes on, lots more conversation, but I just want to continue with a few more bits here. China, quote, will be more cautious with its words and actions about Russia, said Shanghai-based international relations expert Shen Dingli. Some Chinese scholars have gone even further. Yang Jun, a professor at Beijing's China University of Political Science and Law, wrote a commentary published on Saturday that called for Russia to directly support Ukraine to avoid being, quote, dragged into a quagmire of war by Russia. I mean, completely objectively, ideology aside and everything like this, if I was China or someone like this chap, Yang Jun, I'd be saying the same thing. Like, just reading the tea leaves, you're going to be like, yeah, probably. Like, Russia aren't, like I said back in April last year, Russia can't win. There's no way that Putin can win. He's up against the might of the rest of the world. And yeah, yes, there's BRICS and all that, but really, China know that which side their bread is buttered, and it ain't the Russian side. So they do some business with Russia, but they do most of their business with the rest of the world. And if the rest of the world are going to get pretty peed off with China working to defend Russia, then that's going to hurt their investments and their economy going forward. So they need to be supporting. But it's a case of supporting the winners, right? And someone like China are I think ideology plays second fiddle to looking at what is in their best interest first and foremost, and supporting Ukraine, I think, will be in their best interest. Although I have talked about how I've talked about how they gain more if Russia loses the war, because they'll pick up all the pieces inside Russia, both territorial and in terms of hydrocarbons. Anyway, to continue, with the development of the current situation and the trend of the war, China should further adjust its position on Russia and Ukraine, he wrote, and make its attitude clearer and decisively stand on the side of the victors of history. Exactly what I'm saying. We should stand on the side of the victors. Not about ideology. It's about like coming out as well as we possibly can. I'm speaking as a Chinese entity here. If we want to come out, as beneficially from this situation as possible, we need to support Ukraine. He wrote in Chinese language Singaporean newspaper Lianhe Xiaobo or something. He said the Chinese government is also seen to be exercising caution. This is Michel Maidan, head of China Energy Research at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. It seemed to be exercising caution, pointing out that Beijing had not yet signed a deal for a major new gas pipeline connecting the countries, despite the push from Moscow. While China is vital to Russia's economy, China's trade with the likes of the US, the EU, and Japan, among the fiercest critics of Moscow's war in Ukraine, dwarfs its dealings with Russia. And you can add the UK onto that. Beijing now has more, quote, Beijing now has more reasons to have more reservations and to become more transactional in its dealings with Putin's Russia, said Wen Ti-sung. And I think they already were that when Xi Jinping went to Moscow. He came out with much more than he gave to Russia. Russia are in a desperate position, and they're not in a very good power position for negotiations, and that includes with their allies. So India and China are going to be milking Russia for everything it's worth. Everything they can get their hands on. all of those cheap hydrocarbons, yep, we'll have them. And we're going to have them unrefined. So we're going to put the value on that stuff when it gets to our country. We're going to refine it ourselves, give our own guys jobs. You're just going to give it to us dirt cheap and make effectively a loss, especially considering what you budgeted for. So on and so forth. A political scientist said at the Australian National University, uh, there's no point making long-term investment in someone who may not credibly survive into the long term. This is, I mean, I know that's speculation from others rather than China saying that themselves, but I'm fairly sure they're going to be thinking that. And when you look at their actions, actions speak louder than words, right? And words sometimes also speak pretty loudly. Don't see why not. Returning to 1991 borders. So I think, again, is a writing on the wall for Russia. I think it's been on the wall for a long time. It's just how long this is going to take and how much, how much oxygen is in Russia's lungs as they are in this, contained in this death roll underwater as the West and Ukraine do their thing and China looks on, not really helping much. Occasionally pulling on the tail of the alligator, and then letting go and say, "Oh, don't worry, you can carry on." So anyway, to extend a metaphor, thank you. That's today's news. Hope that was of use to you and informative. Please like, subscribe, and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you later.